Ask most railroad fans what replaced the caboose, and you'll get the same answer every time. A little blinking red box called a Fred bolted to the rear coupler. That answer isn't wrong, but it's missing almost the entire story. The caboose actually did 4 separate jobs, and it took 3 different technologies, invented decades apart, plus one of the ugliest labor fights in American railroading, to make all 4 of them disappear. The blinking box only ever handled one. Start with what a caboose crew was actually doing back there, because it was never just riding along at the back of the train. The conductor used the caboose as a rolling office, doing the train's paperwork en route, tracking waybills and switching orders for every car in the consist. 2 crew members sat in a raised lookout called a cupola, watching both sides of the train ahead of them for shifting loads, dragging equipment, or smoke, ready to signal the engineer with a lantern or a radio the moment something looked wrong. A brakeman monitored the air brake pressure at the very rear of the train, since a leak or a separated coupling somewhere in the middle wouldn't necessarily be obvious from the locomotive a mile up front. And on long runs, the caboose doubled as a literal rolling bunkhouse, with a stove, a table, and beds, because putting a 5-person crew up in hotels every single night, hundreds of miles from home, wasn't practical for the railroad or affordable for the workers. 4 jobs, running simultaneously, inside one little red car. The first piece of technology that started dismantling that setup wasn't the Fred, and it wasn't even trying to replace the caboose. It was the roller bearing. For most of railroad history, freight car axles rode in what's called a journal box, a simple sleeve packed with oil-soaked cotton waste, and friction inside that box built up heat over a long run. Enough heat, and the bearing would seize, glow red hot, and potentially snap the axle clean off, a failure railroaders called a hot box. Spotting a hot box before it failed was one of the 2 crew members' full-time jobs in that cupola, watching for smoke or a telltale glow at wheel level as the cars rolled past underneath them. Roller bearings, which use small rotating cylinders instead of a friction sleeve, all but eliminated the problem at the source starting in the mid-20th century. The lookout job wasn't automated. The thing it was watching for simply stopped happening nearly as often. Whatever hotbox risk roller bearings didn't eliminate got picked up by the second technology, and this one really was purpose-built to replace a human lookout. Wayside hotbox detectors, infrared scanners, mounted trackside at regular intervals along a route, read the temperature of every passing axle automatically, and radio the results to the crew up front, calling out defects by car number in a synthesized voice if something's running hot. A detector never blinks, never gets tired near the end of a 12-hour shift, and it checks every single axle on every single train that passes, something no cupola crew scanning by eye at track speed could ever fully guarantee. By the time hotbox detectors were common along main lines, the caboose's original reason for having a raised lookout at all had mostly been engineered out of existence from 2 separate directions at once. The same wayside concept got broader fast. What started as a single-purpose hotbox scanner grew into what railroads now call a defect detector, a trackside station that can also flag dragging equipment, an overheight or overwide load, an unusually high wheel impact suggesting a flat spot, or a fire developing somewhere in a load, all automatically, all reported by radio, before the crew would ever have spotted the same thing from a cupola window doing 60 miles an hour in the rain. The cupola's entire job, watching the train for physical problems as it moved, had a mechanical, tireless replacement running the full length of the route long before anyone got around to negotiating the crew out of the caboose itself. That left brake monitoring and the rolling bunkhouse, and those got solved separately too. The end-of-train device, first used commercially by the Florida East Coast Railway in 1969 and adopted industry-wide through the 1970s and 1980s, is the piece riders and rail fans actually picture when they picture a Fred. It clips onto the rear coupler's air hose and continuously reads brake pipe pressure at the very end of the train, radioing that number back to the locomotive so an engineer can tell instantly if pressure is dropping somewhere behind them. Modern 2-way versions go a step further. If something goes badly wrong, the engineer can trigger an emergency brake application starting from the rear of the train at the same instant as the front, instead of waiting for that signal to travel car by car down a mile of steel. That single feature alone can meaningfully shorten a stopping distance in an actual emergency, which is more than the caboose crew's eyes and a hand-cranked brake wheel could ever promise. None of that solved the bunkhouse problem though, and the honest answer there is that railroads just stopped needing to solve it. As diesel locomotives replaced steam and rail networks reorganized around dedicated crew districts and predictable run lengths, crews increasingly finished a shift close enough to a terminal to go home or to an actual hotel, the same way most other transportation workers do. The Caboose's role as a rolling home for a crew stranded mid-route quietly stopped mattering as operations modernized around it, not because any single device replaced it, but because the problem it solved mostly stopped existing. So by the late 1970s, 3 of the Caboose's 4 jobs had already been handled by roller bearings, wayside detectors, and improved crew scheduling, all without a single labor dispute. The 4th job, the actual crewed presence riding at the rear of every train, was the one railroads had to fight for, because it meant eliminating paid positions. This wasn't a new kind of fight. Railroads had gone through nearly the same battle in the 1960s over the locomotive fireman, a job that existed to shovel coal and tend a steam engine's fire, and that diesel locomotives had made completely pointless. Yet unions kept the position on the payroll for roughly 30 years after steam largely disappeared, until a federally imposed arbitration board finally allowed railroads to eliminate it. Caboose crews followed almost the identical script 2 decades later, argued out district by district and railroad by railroad rather than settled all at once nationally. The technology to remove them had existed for years. What took until the 1980s and 1990s was negotiating, and in some cases having regulators impose new labor agreements and state crew size laws that finally let railroads run trains without a crewed caboose on the back. Regulators didn't take the two-way EOT's reliability on faith either. In the 1990s, after several incidents where trains went into emergency braking from the front, but investigators found the rear brakes had never actually engaged, some because a crew simply forgot the device existed and never activated it, the Federal Railroad Administration issued a formal safety advisory and then a full rule requiring two-way units on a wide range of trains. That detail cuts against the popular image of a flawless little box that simply works. The technology was sound. Making sure crews actually used its full capability took an additional layer of federal rulemaking on top of the engineering. The union argument wasn't purely about protecting jobs for their own sake, even if that was plainly part of it. Crews pointed to real incidents where a caboose lookout had caught a shifted load or a dragging piece of equipment before it caused a derailment. The kind of catch a trackside sensor calibrated for temperature and brake pressure simply isn't built to make. Railroads countered that a device checking every axle on every train, every time, without fatigue, was measurably more reliable at the specific failures it was designed to catch than a tired crew member glancing out a cupola window at track speed in the dark. Both sides were right about different parts of the same job, which is exactly why the fight took years to resolve, rather than being an obvious call either way. Once that fight was settled, the changeover happened fast. By 1990, the vast majority of cabooses in general road service had been retired across North America, replaced by a small electronic box that cost a fraction of what a full caboose and its crew did combined. Workers who once staffed cabooses either moved into other positions or, in plenty of documented cases, simply lost jobs that had existed on the railroad for well over a century. Cabooses didn't disappear entirely, and the places they survived tell you almost exactly what's left of their original job. Yards that do heavy switching still use them as shoving platforms, giving a crew member a safe place to stand and signal from, while a locomotive pushes a cut of cars backward through territory with no clear rear-facing view otherwise. Trains making long backup moves, or working branch lines with old-fashioned hand-thrown switches instead of remote-controlled ones, sometimes still carry one for the same reason. Track maintenance gangs also repurposed old cabooses as mobile field offices and crew shelters, hauling them out to remote stretches of line for weeks at a time, which is really just the rolling bunkhouse function surviving in a completely different context than the one it was built for. In every one of those surviving cases, what's actually being preserved isn't the paperwork desk, the lookout cupola, or the crew bunk from a mainline freight run. It's a person's eyes at the back of a moving train in a situation no camera or sensor fully covers yet. The Fred itself has kept getting smarter since it first showed up in Florida in 1969. And it's worth being specific about what the modern version actually does, because the popular image of a dumb blinking taillight understates it badly. Beyond brake pressure and emergency braking, many units now carry GPS, reporting the train's exact rear position to a dispatcher in real time, useful for anything from verifying a train has fully cleared a section of track to helping locate a car that's separated unexpectedly. Federal regulators eventually got specific about how good it had to be, too. Rules finalized in the late 1990s required two-way units on most trains and set exact standards for how the device gets tested before a train ever leaves the yard, comparing the pressure reading at the front unit against the rear unit and refusing to allow the train out if the two disagree by more than a few pounds per square inch. That's a level of mandated, documented reliability no Caboose crew's hand gauge and hand signals were ever held to. It's a genuinely capable piece of equipment. It's just also, on its own, only ever a fraction of the job description the Caboose used to carry. So the honest answer to what replaced the Caboose is that no single thing did. Roller bearings quietly removed the reason for one of its two lookout jobs. Wayside hotbox detectors automated what was left of the other. Modernized crew scheduling made the rolling bunkhouse mostly unnecessary before anyone had to invent a replacement for it at all. And the crewed position itself, the part with an actual person's judgment attached, only went away after a labour fight that took decades to resolve, echoing almost exactly the fight over steam-era firemen a generation earlier. The little red box gets all the credit because it's the visible part, bolted right where the Caboose used to sit. Everything else it supposedly replaced had usually already been solved by something with no cupola, no bunk, and no name most riders ever bothered to learn.